executed some kind of a turn. Her head is on the side. One foot is behind the other. One hand up and the other one down. And her skirt is just going around like that. It's a very good picture of youthful, feminine flirtatiousness, coquetry. This is a young girl that's just sort of feeling her oats, as it were, and flirting with anybody or anything. And this is my idea of an allemande. I'll pass it around. Have a look at it. I find it interesting that Bach's allemandes seem to emphasize this character that I have delineated, full of zigzag wiggles. Almost all the allemandes have dum, you know, this sort of thing. What is that? Oh, that's girlishness, this sort of thing. Well, as I say, I have no proof of what I'm saying, but it's something. And I always think something is better than nothing. Now, the courant, by contrast, was masculine. Courant evidently comes from the French verb courir, to run. Correre in Italian, corrente sometimes the Italian name for it. And the courant is always in 3. It's 3-2 or 3-4, occasionally, rarely in 3-8. 3-2 or 3-4, and has rapid notes. There is a feeling of running. I've heard descriptions of part of a dance where a couple of young men run down a corridor made by the other dancers, and each one picks up a girl at the end, like that. That's a pretty idea. I don't know how true this is or how often it was done, but there is something a little bumpy and masculine about this dance. And, well, it had better be, just for contrast with the allemande, which comes before. Sometimes courants have a changed rhythm in some of the bars. Sometimes the 3-2 becomes a 6-4 in certain places. There is a rather pleasant alternation, or syncopation, if you want to call it, of the rhythms. After the courant comes the sarabande. You'll find very conflicting reports about sarabandes. It seems to have gotten into Europe through Spain, and there are some theories or some ideas that the sarabande originated in America. It was something that to which the Spaniards were inspired after seeing American Indians with certain dances. I don't know how true this is. It wouldn't matter very much. By the time we get to the 18th century, why the sarabande got to be fairly stylized. I would say that the sarabande was, again, feminine, but not girlish. I always think of the sarabande as a solo dance for a mature woman, not 17, more like 40. And somebody who doesn't flirt. She's too sure of herself. She's just beautiful and graceful and makes no provocative motions of any kind. In the music, you always notice in the sarabande, I say always, I frequently notice a heavy second beat. Thum, ta, da, dee, da, da, dum, thum, ta. Not every beat, but not every measure, but every other measure sometimes. I've read examples of sarabande in music history. Somebody has said that famous aria of Handel, Lascia che pianga, from his opera Rinaldo, that is a sarabande. so. It's plausible that that is in saraband rhythm. Yes, the saraband then is on the slow side, in 3/4 mostly, sometimes 3/2, with a fairly frequent heavy second beat, and graceful and dignified. The jig is something else again. The jig is definitely British. That is, that seems to be its origin. I say British because it is not only English, but it might be Irish or Scottish. And the jig is always, or practically always, in a rhythm which is a multiple of 3. Not 3 stayed beats, not at all. 3 rapid beats. It's a sort of rompy kind of a dance. Well, this has been the favorite rhythm of the English for, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, long before the days of Bach, or for that matter, before the days of Elizabeth I. The oldest tune we know of, English tune, is Summerus Yacumanin, from about 1250. And that's a jig. That's 1250. Well, you get to the Elizabethan days and you get William Byrd. He composed variations for harpsichord on a tune called the Carman's Whistle. Huh. There's 16th century jig for you. Well, they had a lot of political ructions in the 17th century, and they got a king, James II, who was chased out of the country. And it was a song that anti-Jacobite, anti-Jamesian song, which was very popular in those days, called Lily Burlero. I don't know if any of you know of it, but this is about 1689, and the tune went. Again, 1720, somebody imported a kind of liquor from Holland known as gin, and the English lower classes fell for it with a terrific clatter, and half the nation or half the population of London was drunk every day. And apparently there was a tavern somewhere in the Strand where people would turn in. A tavern was called the Weasel. Anyhow, the tune grew up, which was, that's the way the money goes, pop goes the weasel. Well, how does that go? All right, that's 1720. Finally, you get to the 19th century, and you get musical comedy. You get Mr. Sullivan, and he has a musical comedy called the Mikado, and the great tune in the Mikado is he's going to marry Yum Yum today. Another jig. So the English have been jigging for at least 750 years, see? And sooner or later it got to the continent and got to be it got into good society. I imagine they may have danced a jig in French court. I don't know. Anyhow, will you please do me a favor and call it a jig? You will see this thing sometime. G-I-G-U-E. This is just the way you have to write it in French to get something like that sound. But now, for heaven's sake, don't pronounce it French. Don't say jig or jigu or any such. This is J-I-G. And of course, in Italian, you have to have a vowel at the end of every word or every syllable. And so in Italian, it's called giga. Well, you dance the giga. But anybody that speaks English ought to call it a jig. And Bach's jigs are real romping jigs with few exceptions. There are one or two where, well, you don't feel the romp. There may be one or two. But in general, it's the same business. And so forth. Yes. Occasionally, he puts in small note values, breaks up the 6/8 into 6/10, and that's perhaps the romp has to be a little slower then. You play the notes faster, but the dance is slower. But if you're not romping, if you're not dancing a jig, why, I suggest you don't play it. Bach jigs are not etudes. Now, some other dances. There is the gavotte. The gavotte seems to be entirely French, what I can make out. And it's in four beats to the measure. And the important thing is that it has two upbeats. Begins on 3. It's always thump, thump, da, dum, thump, thump, da. The gavotte has been played more often than not, misaccentuated. Sometimes there's a little bit of an excuse for violinists who play the jig from the E major partita for unaccompanied violin. Well, they have to start on a double stop, E, B, this note here. And it's a little hard to play that lightly, and you'll find I'll just give just a few points of extenuation for fiddlers who play. It's wrong, of course, but it should be. Yes, but there's no excuse for pianists playing. No, let's just turn on its head. There you are. Now you can really see it's graceful. Yes. I have no idea what the dance was like, but there's no question of this grace, this airiness, which is brought about by the two upbeats. The bourrée, which is much used by Bach. Bourrée is a French verb which means to crush, to crush something, bourrée. Well, suppose you're in the French countryside. What do you crush? Something nice. What? Grapes. Grapes, right. Good. Bravo. What do you do it with? With the feet. And so you get a bunch of people, country people, snapping on grapes, and what do the bystanders do? They clap hands and they sing a tune. So you have this stomping kind of a rhythm, and Bach is sure to have it. Ta-da-dim, ta-da-did, ta-da-thump-thump-thump. You get it every time, even in the more delicate bourrées. Listen to this one. This is not French suite, this is English. There you are. There you are. And so forth. Thump-bum-bum. You get it all the time. Now, I don't know. A lot of rustic and low-class dancers are attractive, are nice, and the rich and powerful get hold of them and use them. They sometimes manicure them and give them a shave and a haircut. But they manage to make their way, sometimes, the rustic dancers, into good society, and I think the bourrée probably did. At any rate, It forms an important part in a great many of Bach's suites. Then you have the minuet. What's that? Well, the minuet seems to have been a stylization, a mummery of polite gestures, bows, curtsies, approaches, and approaches of people to each other, not too close, of course, or possibly sometimes, I think, linkages, the arm, and walking together. Just a kind of scheme of polite behavior of movement. The minuet was always in three and was dignified, but very graceful, very graceful. There seems to be some difference in the speed of minuets. They may have been faster at one period than at another. But minuets, I think, were definitely in Bach's day already, and did not go out until after the French Revolution, when the kind of people who liked that sort of thing were all very much discomfited. A lot of them had their heads chopped off. What else is there in the dances? Pardon? Yes. The lure, I can't tell you what this is like. The only lures in Bach that I know are in the Fifth French Suite, and there is one in the E major partita for the unaccompanied violin. It seems to be a somewhat slower dance in 6/4. Thum, thum, da thum, 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 da dee, thum, something of that kind. Lure suggests the French word lure with a D, which means heavy. But I don't see anything particularly heavy in these dances. It may be a little more slow, it may be somewhat slower. There's one other dance in the French suites that I cannot tell you much about. That's a thing that he calls anglaise, English. And this is evidently a lively thing in 4/4, and it may be something like the English country dance. The country dance, as such, which was a figure dance danced by numbers of people, I think with in and outs and holding hands, or not holding them long, but just kind of a thing, that got on the continent of Europe, and the word country dance was corrupted to contredanse. You'll find that Beethoven and Mozart and a number of composers of the late 18th century have things called contredanse, but it's probably nothing but country dance. Now I'm wondering, I don't know, I'm wondering whether the anglaise that Bach talks about is something on that order. The rhythm is roughly similar. There's only one example of it in the B minor French suite, this one. Yes. There's one other title of dances in the French suites, a thing called air, A-I-R. Well, air just means tune. And I believe in one of the partitas, it's called aria, which is the same thing. I don't know, this word aria, air, has induced some people to put on airs. The suggestions of grand opera with people in fancy clothes and all this kind of thing. I've heard somebody play a Bach aria as if it were a solemn occasion, and so on. These airs that Bach put in these suites are just dance songs, and they're always in duple rhythm, 4/2 or 4, and there's no occasion to make solemn occasions. It's wrong to make solemn occasions of them. They're just dance tunes. Just what was danced, I don't know. Anyhow, this is my main principle. You play these things, and they've got to have a lilt to them. They've got to have a lilt, otherwise why bother with them? My statement is further corroborated, confirmed by the fact that almost all the tunes in the French suites are in 4-measure phrases. They come in regular four-measure phrases with little semi-cadences going on there. Well, there doesn't seem to be much for me to do except play you a few. Let me see. There was something I think I wanted to say. Pardon?
Polonaise is found frequently.
Ah, yes. Oh, you're right. Not frequently, but at least once, anyhow, in French suites. Yes, excuse me. You're right. Polonaise is found in one of the French suites. Well, the Polonaise of Bach is no different from any other Polonaise in rhythm. The Polonaise is a kind of march. It's a kind of march. March in three. Well, that means that you get out of step each step. You come out on the other foot each time. 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. I believe that some of my elders, people from my own grandmother's generation, would tell me about a Polonaise, that the Polonaise was the thing that would open balls. You'd have these grand balls, grand formal dances, and they'd always begin with a Polonaise. I think the thing that took the place of the Polonaise was the Grand March. The Grand March. Well, it's the same idea. Before the waltzes and mazurkas and other things begin, why, all the ball guests march around the room, the host and hostess at the head, to the strains of either a Grand March or a Polonaise. Now, the Polonaise has certain other characteristics. One of the interesting ones is that the weak notes, that is to say the fast notes are on the strong beats. So you get, let's say you get a 3/4 rhythm, and the 16th notes will come on the first beat. If you say dum, da-da-da-da-dum, that would be, the fast notes would then be on a weaker beat. Or dum, dum, da-da-da-da-da, that would give a kind of graceful feeling. But in a Polonaise, it's da-da-da-da-dum, dum, da-da-da-da-dum, or yum, da-da-dum, ba, that kind of a thing. Also, the very last measure of the tune almost always ends on the third beat. Now, this is just as true of Bach's Polonaise as it is of Chopin's or Liszt's. Chopin will do you. Have this one. All right, and 1, 2, 3, there you are. Liszt has it. There's Liszt. There's just something sort of provocative and jerky about the Polonaise rhythm. Well, Bach's is just like that, too. Of course, it's thinner. It doesn't make that much noise, but it's... Now watch. Here we are. And the last measure of that Polonaise in the E major French suite, there is an appoggiatura on the leading tone, on D sharp. And this is a time when I would play that appoggiatura strictly as written, to a quarter note rhythm. 1, 2, 3, da-da-da-da-da-da. There's your real Polonaise rhythm. Now, why should Bach write a Polonaise? What was back of it? Not a Polonaise. He wrote a great many Polonaises. There's only one in the French suites, but he has many others. He has them in his orchestral suites and elsewhere. Well, they were fashionable in Leipzig or in Saxony around that time because the king of Saxony decided to become a Catholic, and in order to become king of Poland. So people living in Saxony could, in a sense, flatter their king by dancing or playing a Polish dance. Polonaises were very, very much in vogue at that period of the 18th century. For that reason, the king of Saxony was also king of Poland. Well, all right. I'll play you a few. I like to put in C minor, French suite in C minor. It's number 2. Incidentally, this brings up another question of notation. If you look at your notes of the C minor French suite, you'll see that some of those notes have the stems up and some of them have the stems down. Now, you know, the devil usually does his best work with people who try to be good. That's the worst part of it, you see. You can't cheat the devil by just trying to be good. Those stems up and stems down, when you play a fugue, they indicate voices, separation of voices. Undoubtedly, they separate the soprano from the alto, the tenor from the bass. The only thing is that in these dances, there is no polyphony. There is no soprano, alto, tenor, and bass. Why are the stems turned up and the stems turned down? Well, that's just to give a chance to write a different note value to allow the player to hold the note. It's a way of writing out a legato. Yes, the tune does not go, never. It's E flat does go to G and D does go to F, but he's written that in eighth note so as to prevent you from taking it up like this. He wants you to hold it. The same thing. And same here. That is not it. That lower line with the stem turned down is not an alto voice. That's all part of the melody, written that way so that you will hold it down and play legato. That is all there is to it. One mannerism of Bach that I'll call your attention to now. Especially in his dance music, sometimes in his other music too, he loves to jump the left hand down an octave, occasionally up an octave. The leaping octave is a very consistent Bachism. Well, just listen to this Allemande. I'll get my other glasses. Just listen to the leaping octave. Left hand. Bach was a great composer. He wrote a lot of church music, but wrote the Passion according to St. Matthew and the B minor Mass and any number of cantatas and all this kind of thing. But I would say, when you play these, forget the B minor Mass, temporarily. The fact is that at this period in his life, he was interested only in chamber music. He had no professional duties with the church at all. And he was just interested in instrumental music. And of course, and I'll say this for him, I think that the biographers seem to agree that these 6 years he spent there were the happiest of his life. He really could live for the kind of music that he wanted to make. So just don't get a false image about this composer. Yes, ma'am?
Can I ask another question, please? How about the phrasing? Is there a general rule that's followed between the staccatos and the two-note phrasing of
Oh, the staccatos and the legatos, you mean? I don't think there's a general rule at all. This is a matter of taste. Now, I think you make more staccato on a piano than you ever would on a harpsichord. I'll say that. Because the staccato gives an impression of neatness, distinctness, in which the piano is really deficient. The harpsichord doesn't need it. Every tone you play is just a fine little ping in your ear. There's no question about what that note is. On the piano, you sometimes need to emphasize the thing with a little detached sound, a more sudden sound to indicate that that's just the point you want. Do you understand? So I would say you can play more staccato when you play a piano than you ever would if you were playing a harpsichord. But there are no rules about it. You know, what rules would you have? The rules, who makes the rules anyway? The music has got to inspire you one way or the other, you know. You have to, of course, get hold of the spirit of the music, which is the essential thing. There are lots of things that can be played legato and can be played staccato, and they're nice both ways. Things can be played a little faster, a little slower. They're nice both ways, depending on, well, on your feeling of the moment and so forth. You know, this business of rules and how do you make the ornaments and is this the right way to do that and all this kind of thing. Of course, I appreciate the earnestness that goes back of these questions, but I can only quote the Bible again. St. Paul, he said, the letter killeth, but the Spirit giveth life, see. So this applies to playing Bach. If you get the spirit of it, it's going to be alive. One person will do it differently from another. But don't go by rules and don't think I'm a good girl, I follow the rule. This is all right, but it gets you no music. There's one thing I didn't mention about a jig, which is that usually it was customary that the second half would start off with the theme of the first half upside down. That's true of all the jigs. All those that I've played. You had the second. See, it's upside down. This one too. Upside down. And even this one. Then. Upside down. The second half is contrary motion of the first half. That was just a convention of the times. Well, anything else you would like to ask me? I don't have much more to tell you about these suites. It's my firm conviction that they have to sound with a dance rhythm. Whether that's the authentic rhythm that they were danced in, I don't know. I don't think anybody knows. You can't prove anything about something that went on for 200 years over 1,000 miles square radius. But any kind of dance rhythm is better than none, I would say. It just will not do to just play these things as pieces and say, oh yes, these were done by the man who wrote the B minor Mass, and you have to get real solemn about them. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
May I ask, would you recommend that you did with Units first the French or the three-part advance?
Oh, I think the suites first. The three-part inventions are quite hard, and they ought not to be bracketed with the two-part. The two-part are relatively accessible to young people, to students in the earlier stages. The three-part really require a great deal more control, whereas many of the movements of the French suites are quite accessible to youngsters. They may not be able to do all of the movements, but a great many of them can be done. Yes, I am. In fact, we had a meeting about that in our piano faculty some years ago, and I think we've adopted it as a principle. The three-voice inventions have particular problems. You take that very first one, that's very difficult. It sounds very smooth and easy. It's easy to listen to, but it's pretty hard to play. Even the E minor, which is slower and gives you time to think, is very hard. So I would say get the youngsters started with the French suites, by all means, yes. Well, some other questions. I was talking about the inventions, that the question of the speed at which Bach's music is played might be an interesting thing to think about. How does one determine the speed, shall we say, of a two-voice invention? These editions have, the markings are all corrupt. They have allegros and all this kind of thing, which are not in the originals at all. I would say that you can get an idea of speed, of suitable speed, by analyzing the size of figures, of repeated figures, motives. The shorter the figure, the faster I think the thing has to go. If you take a repeated short figure, say a 3 or 4 note figure, and play it too slowly, it's a deadly bore. But if you have a 7, 8 note figure, or still a larger, still longer figure, why, you must play it a little more slowly so that the notes can all sink in. So you take the first invention, for example, and it's been marked allegro in some books, but I don't see this. This spoils the charm of that melody, that speed. It's a 7-note figure. Yes. On the other hand, you take the F major, and you have... Now, if you start in playing that at a more moderate speed, it's an awful bore. It has to go. But if it's an 8-note figure or 7, it can go a great deal slower. Do you understand? Mm-hmm. It's a thing that I've thought about. That first invention of Bach is a beautiful study in sectional form, thing I mentioned. These inventions are mostly in sectional forms, like the fugue. You have that little motive, and it goes on. 2 voices take it up, and it's taken in contrary motion right away. And finally, it comes to a cadence in another key, G major, the sister key, or what do you call it? Not sister, the cousin key. And then it starts in G major and goes off into some other keys, finally gets a cadence in A minor. And then the third section goes back home. You have a real little short story there. justifies the beginning. It's in 3 definite sections. Oh, there are other cute things in it. That's the contrary motion of the theme. But the other boy goes up in scale poem that way. Now, in the next section, you have the same thing, only the voices are reversed. See that? So there's a little element of unity and variety too, variety in unity. But that's with the contrary motion. Then at the end, you have the motive right side up, but the counterpoint goes down. So look at all the changes you can ring on that thing. You can have it this way, and then you can have it that way, and then you can have it this way again, but everything turned upside down. See, this way. That little piece is a masterpiece, an absolute masterpiece, that first invention is. Yes. Well, something else before?
How about the tempo of the B flat one?
The B flat? Well, this is a leisurely little movement, you know. After all, if you have...
Not too fast.
Well, no, the movement must not sound fast, but those 30-second notes have to be fast. I mean, you can't hold those things up. It's going to be a deadly bore, and they occur again and again and again and again. This is going to just... But the 30-second notes seem fast, but the general movement is very moderate. It's a very leisurely motion, but meanwhile the comes out. You have to be careful with those 30 seconds, because if you don't get the right stress, they're going to be very tacky. And then the thumb comes out too loud. See? And then it's like... That's upward, see? That first note has to be light.